Сейчас включаем трансляцию. Добрый день, глубоко уважаемые коллеги и гости. Позвольте заседание диссертации.
Dear colleagues, we are beginning the panel session for the defense of the thesis by Zhang Zizhu. The specialization is 10-0103, Foreign Literature, Literature of Europe, America and Australia. The topic of the thesis is Love Lyrics of Edmund Spenser. Under the issue ordered by St. Petersburg State University, number 1567/1, I, Professor Paula Boyarinova, Doctor of Philology, Professor of the Department of History of Foreign Languages at St. Petersburg State University, have been appointed the chairperson of this dissertation board. Let me introduce my colleagues. Professor Altashina Veronika Dmitrievna, Doctor of Philological Science, Professor of the Department of History of Foreign Literatures at St. Petersburg State University. Professor Olga Yuryevna Antsiferova, Doctor of Philological Science, Professor of the Department of English Literature, Sedelse University of Natural Sciences and Humanities. Oleg Yurievich Polyakov, Doctor of Philological Science, Professor of the Department of Russian and Foreign Literature and Teaching Methods at Vyatka State University. We'll have a short break. We have some technical issues. Перерыв дадим.
Продолжаем.
We continue with our agenda. Tatiana Viktorovna Yakushkina, Doctor of Philological Science, Professor of the Department of English Language and Literature at Russian Hydrometeorological University. Professor Polyakov and Professor Antsiferova are attending our session via Skype. First of all, I would like to say that under the federal law, as of the 23rd of August 1996, number 127, on science and state scientific and technical policy, St. Petersburg State University is entitled to confer academic degrees. The corresponding order on the procedure of granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University was issued on the 1st of September 2016. The current session of the dissertation board is held in accordance with this order. According to the above-mentioned order, the session of the dissertation board is valid providing 2/3 of the appointed members are present. The total number is not to be fewer than 4 people. The dissertation board consists of 5 people, 5 of which are present, including 2 people who are attending the defense remotely via Skype. Therefore, we have a quorum. The agenda of the session is as follows. The session is not to exceed 2 hours. Number 1, the chairman's presentation about the documents submitted by the candidate for the degree and their conformity with the requirements. Chairman's reply to questions, if any. The candidate's presentation providing an overview and findings of the research, 15 minutes. Number 3, questions to the candidate regarding the presentation, no more than 2 minutes for each question. Number 4, reports on the thesis. The board members will be taking the floor in turns, no more than 10 minutes for each person. Number 5, the candidate's comments about the reports on the thesis, no more than 15 minutes. Number 6, open discussion. The floor will be given to the non-members of the audience. They can give a brief account of their ideas or ask questions about the research. No more than 5 minutes for each person. It is necessary to fill in the registration form and give their full name before the talk. The registration form is on the first desk. Number 7. The candidates reply to the questions, no more than 5 minutes. Number 8. Presentation of the candidate's thesis supervisor. Number 9. 5-minute break before the open balloting on conferring or non-conferring the academic degree. The discussion of the results of the defense is not broadcast. Number 10, open balloting. Vote counting and recording of the results in the protocol. Number 11, making a decision on whether to confer or not to confer the academic degree. Number 12, the candidate's closing speech, no more than 2 minutes. Before proceeding with the agenda, I would like to ask you to switch off your mobile phones. Thank you. The panel session of the Dissertation Board is being recorded and broadcast on St. Petersburg State University website and is being interpreted into English. Now let's proceed with our agenda. So, the chairman's brief presentation. The thesis by Zhang Zizhu is submitted in conformity with the requirement for the degree of the candidate of philological science. The specialization is 10-0103, foreign literature. The topic is Love Lyrics of Edmund Spenser. The thesis was approved for the defense by the order of the Academic Secretary on the 15th of March 2018, order number 1861/1. The Dissertation Board is set up in accordance with the order issued by the Academic Secretary on the 12th of March 2018. And I have already introduced the board members. The candidate for the degree has submitted the following documents to the Academic Secretary. An application in the name of the rector, Professor Nikolai Kropychev, with a request to examine the thesis and accept it for the defense. The application was submitted on the 2nd of February 2018. Report of the supervisor, Professor Irina Burova. A list of published works containing 8 items which describe the research findings. 4 academic papers have been published in peer-reviewed journals recommended by the Ministry of Education and Science, and 1 article have been published in a Web of Science indexed journal. Number 4. Letter of verification issued on the 21st of November 2017, number 04A343, issued by St. Petersburg State University. The letter of verification certifies that Zhang Zizhu was enrolled as a postgraduate student. Specialization 450601, Linguistics and Literary Studies. The candidate has passed 3 qualifying exams in History and Philosophy of Science, Foreign Language and Foreign Literature. He has obtained an excellent mark for the 3 exams. A copy of the Higher Education Certificate issued by St. Petersburg State University, number 04759. It was issued on the 26th of September 2012, and he has a degree of the Master of Philology. Thesis in Russian and in English. A printed version with a manuscript copyright and a digital copy. The thesis formatting and reference list comply with the state standard. So everything complies with the requirements. I should say that the above-mentioned documents comply with Item 12 of Section 3 of the Order on the Procedure of Granting Academic Degrees and St. Petersburg State University. Now, I give the floor to the candidate for the degree.
Members of the Dissertation Board, the Chair Lady, the object of our research consists of the collections Four Hymns, Amoroti and Epistolamion, and the poem Prosolamion. The subject of the study is as follows: the ideas of love and beauty reflected in the poet's love poetry, sources and traditions of the hymn, sonnet, anacreontic poem, and epistolamion as the reforms. Spenser's contribution to the development of these genres, the aesthetic system in Spenser's love lyrics. The research is based on a complex methodological approach combining elements of historical, comparative and structural methods, supplemented by elements of the biographical approach, which seems appropriate due to the autobiographical nature of the lyrical cycle Amoreti and Epistolamion, as well as elements of close reading and narrative analysis. Love lyrics has been in the spotlight of scholars for many years, hence the number of publications devoted to it. Here I can mention Bennett, Green, Johnson, Miola, Welsford, Hiatt, and Burrower. The novelty of the study is determined by the attempt to establish the close affinity between four hymns, Amoreti and Epistolamion and Prosolamion. We see the general task of the thesis in the further development of the scholarly concept of Spenser's love lyrics and revealing the artistic system underlying them, which would contribute to their further exploration. The task determined the subtasks of the research. Number 1, to specify the ideals of love and beauty put forward and praised by Spenser, and to inscribe them in the context of the searches of his predecessors and contemporaries. Number 2, to study the sources and traditions of such literary forms as the hymn, sonnet, anachronic poem, and epistolamion, and to determine Spenser's contribution to their development. Number 3, to focus on the images of the lover and his beloved and their interplay in Spenser's love lyrics. Number 4, to review the internal and external composition of Spenser's love lyrics to get a deeper insight into his creative conceptions. Number 5, to give a holistic analysis of Spenser's love lyrics as an organic unity, to uncover their recurrent themes and motives, the general ideas of love and beauty underlying them. The above-mentioned tasks define the structure of the thesis paper, consisted of an introduction, 3 chapters, subdivided into sections, and the bibliography, including 285 sources. Chapter 1 comprises 2 sections. The first focuses on the Neoplatonic ideas before Spenser and while he was alive. The second focuses on the analysis of 4 hymns, which allowed us to make several conclusions. Castiglione and Miraldoe gave the biggest influence on Spenser's 4 hymns. Supporting the idea that the hymns were written at different times, we believe that the first pair was revised before the publication. The link between both pairs of hymns is achieved through one and the same for the whole of the hymnal cycle concept of the letter of love and the character going up it in all 4 poems. Spenser's description of the letter of love is the closest to the ascension scheme suggested by Castiglione. The philosophical concept of love set forth in 4 hymns is stable, which suggests a possibility to expect the same concept in other love poems by Spenser. This philosophic concept was stable, as I said, so we suppose that we find it reflected in all other works devoted to love. The second chapter analyzes the sonnet cycle Amoretti and Anacreontic poems. In the sonnet cycle Amoretti, the images of the hero and the heroine combine the individual features of their real prototypes, Spenser Elizabeth, with the literary tradition of describing the lover and his beloved. The display of the influence exerted by the beloved on the lover in the process of courtship, the interaction between the poet and his chosen one are one of the most important features of Amoretti. Spenser, following in Petrarch, most probably regarded the chronological narration as a means to turn Amoretti into a cycle, while Petrarch was less strict in chronological approach. In his Anacreontic poems, Spenser uses the traditional motive, Cupid and the bee, providing it with some new content. When Cupid was stung by a bee, Venus applied some balm on the sting. It's a metaphor. Just as Cupid, stung by the bee, had suffered before his suffering was elevated by his mother's care, the lover has to go through trials and suffering from the uncertainty of his hopes and his latest indifference before he can win her favor and gains an opportunity to sing his wedding. Anacreontic poems served as a kind of a miniature model for the artistic world of Epithalamion, with the promise of a happy marriage. In the third chapter, we focus on the two wedding poems, Epithalamion and Prothalamion. It allowed us to make the following conclusions. Number one, the genre canon of the Renaissance Epithalamion, supported by the authority of ancient authors, had been formed even before the time when Spenser started his work on Epithalamion, so he could extensively borrow the topical ideas and motives from the works of his predecessors, giving preference to Theocritus, Catullus and Claudianus. Secondly, the temporal structure of Epithalamion is characterized by a chronological order. However, by means of the numerological and astronomical symbolism, the poet made an attempt to go beyond the linear time structure and to create an internal monument to the day of his own wedding. This allowed us to reveal mirror symmetry of the composition that underpins similarity of the episodes and the structure of central symmetry. In Epithalamion, the lover achieved his goal, having reconciled the Petrarchist contradiction between physical and spiritual love through the church marriage. Prothalamion is a subgenre of the Epithalamion because it contains certain motifs, images and artistic techniques which were already used in the earlier Epithalamia by Spenser. Let us now dwell on the major conclusions. Number one, one of the main ideological foundations of Spenser love lyrics is the notion of beauty and love adopted by the poet from Plato and his Renaissance interpreters. The ideas of love and beauty drawn from the works of the Neoplatonists were set forth in full detail by Spenser in his cycle Four Hymns. Secondly, in his love lyrics, Spenser did not follow in the traditions blindly, nor did he break with them. He made a great contribution into the development of traditional genres. The philosophical poems included in Four Hymns continue the tradition of ancient hymnography, but the poet essentially developed the genre, imparting it a personal character. In Amoretti and Epithalamion, Spenser doesn't limit himself with striving only for spiritual love and creating mentally an ideal female image and strives for a church marriage. Spenser turned separate frivolous poems into the cycle and used his Anacreontics as the interlude, providing a smooth transition to Amoretti and Epithalamion with its themes and architectonics. He used a complex numerical code while creating his Epithalamion. The poet increased the volume of the poem and the number of stanzas comprising it. Spenser combined the images of the bridegroom and the master of ceremonies, whose part in both important and characteristic of an Epithalamion. Number three, Though the poet imparted his lady an angelic character, the motive of Donna Angelicata, it only emphasizes her purity and innocence, but all the same, in most cases, she is perceived as a real person. Out of respect for the tradition, in Amoretti the poet portrays the lover's trials similar to those of the heroes of the earlier Petrarchian poets. However, this is supplemented by a description of his own real experiences. The lover sees the goal of his courtship in making it an internal alliance with his beloved, and therefore adapts the Petrarchan motives of the Donna Angelica and crew affair to solve his own artistic tasks. The structure of the collection of poems, Four Hymns, by Spenser, was influenced by George Chapman's collection of hymns, The Shadow of Night, which comprises two parts, Hymnus in Noctem and Hymnus in Cynthium. Spenser also divides his collection into two groups. Unlike Chapman, Spenser in his Four Hymns achieves a height of their ideological unity that's describing a successive climbing up the ladder of love. Let me focus on some hypotheses which were previously put forward as regards temporal structure of Amoretti and Epithalamion. The one of the calendar principle of composition of Amoretti, or the one proposing the division of the stanzas of Epithalamion into day and night groups, are usually based upon the notion of the identity of the time of narration and the time of the events described, which in most cases is really maintained. At the same time, it's impossible to deny that certain moments in the narrative are just undeterminable. So it's necessary to discriminate between the real time of events and the time of narration about them, which can be facilitated by further research. Collections for hymns and Amoretti and Epithalamion harmoniously complement each other. Apart from the underlying idea and the recurrent images, an additional link between Four Hymns and Amoretti and Epithalamion has been established due to mythological metaphors hinting at marriage used in a hymn in honor of love and in anacreontic poems. Of no less importance is the fact that it is necessary to purify oneself with suffering before one achieves the true bliss that makes up one of the main themes of Four Hymns. The idea is inherent to all love poems by Spenser. Contemplation on transcendental perception aimed at achieving a mystical ecstasy in a hymn in honor of heavenly love and a hymn in honor of heavenly beauty does not contradict the life-love practice that, in Amoretti and Epithalamion and Epithalamion, is associated with marriage as a social institution. The theoretical value of the research is stipulated by the study of the psycho problems, establishing the difference between Petrarch's collection of poems, Il Canzoniere, and the lyrical psycho exemplified in our study by Spenser's Amoretti and Epithalamion. Petrarch provided his collection with a Latin subtitle, Rerum Vulgarium Fragmenta. We believe that Il Canzoniere is characterized by centrifugality and relatively free structure, while Spenser's lyrical psycho is a centripetal coherent narrative, all parts of which are subordinate to the task of narrating the story of the relationship between the lover and his beloved, culminating in a happy wedding. Besides in our study, the concept of the cycle is extended to the collection of poems and Spenser's love lyrics as a whole. Are there any questions to the candidate to the topic of his research? We don't have any questions. Thank you. You can now take your seat. We are proceeding with our agenda. These are reports from the members of the Dissertation Board. We have received reports from all the board members. All the reports were uploaded on the official website according to the relevant order. We will start with my reports on the Thesis.
So the report on the thesis, which is submitted in conformity with the requirements for the degree of the candidate of science. The topic of the thesis is Love Lyrics by Edmund Spenser. So, literary works by Edmund Spenser is not famous However, we know lots of important names of the Elizabethan period, and the balance that we see in Spenser's work, namely the reformation of the verse and the combination of the classical tradition and British traditions, is of great importance. And this is the main idea of the thesis by Zhang Zizhu. The purpose of the thesis is to identify the artistic system underlying the love lyrics by Spenser. He studies 4 hymns, a collection of sonnets Amoretti, anacreontic poems, and wedding poems, epithalamion and brothalamion. The author of the thesis focuses on several issues, one of them being the genre issue. He studies the history of genres in European and in English literature, and also their specific features in Spenser's literary work. The second focus of his interest is the affinity and coherence of literary works. Thirdly, the author of the thesis also studies how Spenser's ideas are consistent with the aesthetics of the Renaissance philosophy. And finally, he also studies some less known features of Spenserian lyrics. The structure of the thesis is well structured and logical. He analyzes the major theoretical works. And in the first chapter, he studies 4 hymns as a cycle in which we see his ideas on Neoplatonic love. The candidate for the degree speaks about such Renaissance Neoplatonists as Ficino, Pico della Mirandola and Castiglione. The author emphasizes that there is an affinity between the 2 hymns, because in both hymns the author focuses on the love ladder and on the ascension on the love ladder. However, these ideas can also be traced in other works by Edmund Spenser. I think that the second chapter is critical for the research, because Amoretti and Epithalamion is connected with Spenser's biography, and here he tries to reconcile erotic and spiritual love by referring to the institution of marriage. Here it is important to show the dynamics of the relationships between the lover and his beloved, and there we see traditional images of the lover and his beloved, as well as some biographical prototypes. I would like to emphasize that the candidate for the degree also studies the opposition between Petrarchism and anti-Petrarchism in the English sonnet tradition. A significant contribution can be seen in the next chapter. Especially, I would like to emphasize the comparative analysis of epithalamion and brothalamion. Speaking about the merits of the thesis, I would like to emphasize the extensive knowledge of the author and the fact that he knows the historical and cultural context. He shows the content-related and formal coherence of love poems by Spenser. In other words, he is able to solve all the tasks set up in the introduction. He demonstrates his serious research skills and abilities, and his research findings have scientific value. In the critical part of my report, I would like to focus on 2 aspects. First of all, the candidate for the degree says that the poems are regarded as love lyrics. However, he also describes the narrative aspect of such poems. I think we should have extended the title of the thesis and used the term poetry instead of the term lyrics. My second remark deals with the part of the thesis which describes Amaretti and English sonnets. I think it would be better for the thesis if the author had given a more detailed and salient comparison of Spenser's sonnets with those by his contemporary Philip Sidney. But we see only one paragraph devoted to this issue. In conclusion, I would like to say that this is an interesting research work which has relevance and scientific novelty. The thesis by Zhang Zizhu, Love Lyrics by Edmund Spenser, complies with the major requirements set forth in the order number 6821/1 on granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University, and the candidate Zhang Zizhu can be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of philology. The specialization is 100103, foreign literature. The chairperson of the dissertation board, Professor Polubayarinova. This was my report on the thesis. Now we'll have a short break because we have some technical issues.
Спасибо. Связь восстановлена, мы продолжаем.
Thank you. We can proceed with our agenda. Now, the next thesis is by Veronika Altashina. Despite the fact that there are lots of research works devoted to Edmund Spenser, there are also many gaps in literary studies, and the thesis by Zhang Zizhu fills in such gaps. He chooses a comprehensive approach which seems to be very effective. The scientific novelty is defined by the fact that he is trying to establish the affinity between the works by Spenser. He also tries to identify the ideological foundations and give his own approach to the contents and structure. First of all, I would like to say that all the research findings are proven in the thesis. The thesis is well structured and very authentically written. The chapters and paragraphs are written in a logical way, and each chapter is accompanied by conclusions which link the chapters between each others. The thesis also has a polemic nature. He argues with his predecessors or agrees with some predecessors and proves his own point of view. The first chapter deals with the four hymns, which are the ideological foundation of Spenser's lyrics. He underlines the connection between the existing traditions and English sonnets. He emphasizes that Spenser's sonnets do not break away from the tradition. The author also proves the connection between the two hymns by analyzing the hymns in an in-depth way. The author also shows that the four hymns represent the ideas of Spenser very clearly and deeply. This is the first time that we have seen the connection between the ascension on the love ladder and Castiglione's love ladder. He shows that this ascension has a forward and backward movement. The next chapter deals with Amaretti and Anacreontic poems. It starts with the analysis of the traditions of showing the concept of love in Renaissance and medieval literature. It is interesting to say that the beloved woman is shown as someone who is playing an active role. He also analyzes the fictional and biographical aspects in Spenser's works. The analysis of the numerology helps him to give a new interpretation of the poems. Another merit of the thesis is the analysis of anacreontic poems. 9 stanzas, which divide the 2 main parts of the collection of poems, but which are not included into the title. Anacreontic poems have long been considered as something that was included by chance, but Zhang Zizhu regards them as an integral part of the lyrical cycle. It is not an interlude between the 2 parts in the author's opinion, but a part which sums up the main idea of Amaretti. The 3rd chapter deals with wedding songs, epithalamion and prothalamion. The author decided to combine the analysis of the 2 poems, although epithalamion was published in 1595 and prothalamion was published in 1596. He shows that these 2 poems are connected, and the analysis of the bride and the bridegroom seems also very interesting because he compares them with Orpheus and Eurydice, Adam and Eve. This is not new, but the author gives a more detailed analysis of these 2 couples. He analyzes the word plays and the symbols and offers a new interpretation. He comes to the conclusion that prothalamion uses different poetic forms, but it is not part of epithalamion, since epithalamion and prothalamion are 2 different things, one of them being a wedding song. In conclusion, he speaks about the research findings, the relevance and novelty. 8 publications reflect the contents of the thesis. The critical part of my report is not long. In the thesis there are 15 research findings to be defended, but not all of them seem to be important. Research finding number 12 says that in epithalamion Spenser praises the bride and it allows the bridegroom to continue his ascension on the love letter. Research finding number 13 speaks about the necessity to see the time of the narration and the time of the real events as something different. I believe these are just specific conclusions, but they do not have any theoretical value. I also think that the candidate for the degree analyzes the content of the love lyrics, but he doesn't pay enough attention to the poetic features. For example, it would be interesting to write about the sound pattern, rhymes, rhythm, tropes, and so on. These critical remarks are specific in nature and they do not undermine the high evaluation of his thesis. It is a research work that is written in a very good language and demonstrates his research abilities. The thesis complies with the major requirements set forth in order number 6821/1 on granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University, and Zhang Zizhu can be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of philology. The specialization is 100103, foreign literature, literature of Europe, America and Australia. Thank you. Thank you very much for your report on the thesis. Now the floor is given to Professor Antsiferova. The thesis by Zhang Zizhu fills in the gaps in literary studies devoted to Edmund Spenser, whose contribution cannot be praised too highly. Despite a great number of works in this area, the candidate for the degree focuses on love lyrics by Edmund Spenser. This is the first time that we have seen a comprehensive study of love lyrics by Edmund Spenser. In this thesis, 4 hymns, Emerete and Epithalamen and Prothalamen, are regarded as an artistic unity which has similar ideas and basic ideological lines. The relevance of the research is defined by the literary works themselves, but also by a number of theoretical issues which are raised in the thesis. For example, the issue of artistic unity. He is trying to find the artistic system that is underlying Spenser's love lyrics. He sets up the purpose and the task of the thesis, which define the structure of the thesis. The thesis has a traditional structure, and the reference list includes 285 items. The introduction has all the information which is mandatory for this part of the work. The introduction proves why it is important to refer to the cultural and historical backdrop in the research. I find it quite interesting that the author presents a rationale about the terms of cycle and sequence. He reviews the ideas of English humanism, which we see in the works by Italian Neoplatonists. He also pays a lot of attention to his predecessors and is very accurate in his utterances. The first chapter is devoted to the 4 hymns, which is the ideological foundation of love lyrics by Edmund Spenser. In the center of it, we see Neoplatonic ideas which Spenser found out through the ideas of Renaissance Neoplatonists. In the further chapters, he sums up the ideas of Neoplatonists. I like that he combines different approaches to studying Spenser's works, and to this end he shows the historical context, which is also important. The only critical remark that I have here is that he doesn't mention the name of Pindar, a famous Greek author of hymns. The candidate for the degree is familiar with the works of his predecessors, and he offers his own hypotheses, which sound quite convincing. For example, the hypothesis about the influence of George Chapman's poems on Spenser's works. The comprehensive analysis of Spenser's works make the research findings and conclusions justified and valuable. The second chapter speaks about the genres of love lyrics, sonnets and anacreontics. Following the same model of analysis, the candidate for the degree studies the history of the issue, studies the sonnets, and shows the innovative role of Spenser in creating English sonnets. I like that he compares recurring images of the lover and his beloved in Emerete against the backdrop of the Italian predecessors. While assessing Spenser's works, he focuses on the communicative nature of his sonnets and about the change in gender characteristics. He also pays attention to hymns and sonnets as part of a single unity, united by the idea of Neoplatonic love concept. A great attention is paid to the structure of the poems. As a result, he comes to interesting conclusions about Spenser's works. He somehow rehabilitates anachronistic poems in his thesis and regards them as an integral part, as an interlude, and part of the overall numerological code. Here, the candidate for the degree sees a succession between Amoretti and Epithalamen, but also he sees a succession between Anacreontics and Epithalamen. Anacreontic poems, in his opinion, are a separate cycle, and this is proved in the thesis. The third chapter is devoted to Spenser's wedding songs. He starts by analyzing the history of the genre, starting from Theocritus, Catullus, and Renaissance authors. He analyzes the genre and shows its popularity. He shows the innovative ideas by Spenser, the in-depth analysis of Catullus' works, and the analysis of Spenser's Epithalamen allow him to show the unity of Spenser's works on the one hand, and the fact that he followed his Roman predecessor in the structure of the poem. I believe that section 314 is very interesting. In this section, he describes the bride and the bridegroom, and he compares them with Orpheus and Eurydice, Adam and Eve, Christ and the Church of Christ. It allows him to analyze the combination of antique and biblical components in Spenser's wedding songs. And it also allows him to show a new interpretation of Spenser's wedding songs. The analysis of Prothalamen seems also very logical. Before, not many works have been devoted to Prothalamen, and it gives the author of the thesis an opportunity to show his new approach and new interpretation. So this is a very deep analysis which has lots of merits. But I would like to ask one question and to give one remark. The thesis, the author of the thesis says that we don't know anything about the books that Spenser read. So he makes his assumptions on theoretical works, and he pays much attention to treatises by Italian Renaissance philosophers. And he proves that Spenser was familiar with their works. But after reading the thesis, a question arises. Why didn't you pay so much attention to Italian and French Renaissance poems with which Spenser might have been familiar? So we don't know if the school of Dolce Stil Novo had any influence on Spenser. We don't know if Spenser was familiar with the New Life by Dante, or should we say that Renaissance and medieval love poetry was known to Spenser only through the followers of Petrarch. However, on page 94 you mention that Spenser wrote about Donna Angelicata, which is a specific feature of Dolce Stil Novo. The second remark is as follows. You pay a lot of attention to Neoplatonic ideas in Spenser's poetry, but I think that you should have described the concept of the love letter by Castiglione in the first chapter, since this is one of the underlying concepts for the analysis in your thesis. The thesis is written in a very good language, has a good style. This is especially valuable because Russian is not your native language. I have found only 2 misprints in the thesis. So, speaking about the translation, I can say that the translation to English is adequate. The practical relevance of the thesis is as follows. It can be used to develop courses in English literature, in courses on the history of English poetry, and in making comments for Spenser's collection of poems. The research findings are reflected in 8 publications, 4 of which have been published in peer-reviewed journals recommended by the Ministry of Science. So I can say that the thesis by Zhang Zizhu is a complete research graduate work, and it complies with the major requirements set forth in Order 6821/1 on granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University. And Zhang Zizhu can be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of philology. The specialization is 100103, Foreign Literature, Literature of Europe, America and Australia. Thank you. Thank you for your report. Now let's move on with our agenda. The floor is given to Professor Polyakov.
The dissertation focuses on love lyrics of Edmund Spenser. It's a comprehensive study of several collections of hymns of his. The study is relevant as it focuses on the issue of a lyrical cycle. The candidate's primary focus is the Renaissance. So he provides a comprehensive analysis of love lyrics by Spenser and interprets 4 hymns as the lyrical cycle due to conceptual and thematic links between it and Amoretti and Epithalamion, elaboration of current use on the latter as a lyrical cycle, pointing at an important role of anacreontic poems in its structure, and thorough analysis of the relations of the characters of Amoretti and Epithalamion. What's special of the latter lyrical cycle is the active role of Lady of Sonnets, who triggers the spiritual evolution of the enamored poet, which brings him to the brand new ideal of love. It is remarkable that the candidate chooses to analyze the works in a chronological way different from the one Spenser wrote them in. In the 4 hymns, Spenser shares his ideas of love and beauty, which were shaped due to the ideas of continental Neoplatonists, and that became the ideological foundation that the candidate for the degree uses to analyze the poet's works. First chapter focuses on the 4 hymns by Spenser as the ideological foundation of his love lyrics. The candidate shows good knowledge of Neoplatonist works. So, as he points out, Renaissance love philosophy is well studied, so he doesn't see any reason to repeat the well-known ideas. See, he finds it more productive to focus on the analysis on a particular literary work. However, he doesn't substantiate the choice of certain works, and he doesn't show enough evidence for his choice of Marsilio Ficino, Giovanni Pico, Della Mirandola, Aberbanel and Castiglione. The review of the concepts, especially Castellan concepts, is too concise, and the candidate states that the ladder of love, and this is the concept he often uses in the dissertation, was borrowed from Castellan. The candidate sees a lot of similarities in Spenser lyrics and in Italian poems. However, some of the dissertation fragments of the dissertation are valuable in their own right. The candidate doesn't manage to provide enough evidence for the similarities. For example, he has that for the lover it's difficult to contemplate such a more perfect beauty with physical sight. This is a reference to dialects of love, and a similar viewpoint was voiced by Castellan. And the dialogues were first issued in 1535, so after the poet's death. However, the book of the courtier was issued in 1516, and it was translated into English in 1561. So Castellan, as a philosopher, is really secondary to Pietro Bembo. So I highly recommend the candidate to refer to that work in his future research. The second chapter focuses on Amoretti and anacreontic poems, regarded as an anacreontic insertion which separates Amoretti and Epithalamion. It has been a point of much debate by Miola, Burova, and other researchers. They regard anacreontic insertion as a tool to provide smooth transition from Epithalamion, from the sonnet sequence to Epithalamion. So the candidate is well aware of that and enriches this concept with an idea that Spenser summarizes major themes of all other sonnets in this one insertion. The candidate has made his personal contribution. The study has shown that Spenser sometimes goes beyond Petrarca's conflict, in which the love lady incites the lover to grow spiritually so that his love can be returned. The candidate analyzes the sonnet sequence, Amoretti and anacreontic poems in one chapter and devotes the other chapter to Epithalamion and Prosthalamion. He provides enough reliable bibliographic sources and continues the line typical of St. Petersburg school of the analysis of Tudor love poetry. He provides an elaboration of views about Amoretti, and it's pinned out by the detailed analysis of recurrent images of the enamored man and the love lady. What is of novelty here is the attention to the time structure and architectonics of the cycle. The linearity of Spenser and their connection with certain events makes the candidate think that Amoretti bases itself upon a chronological principle. I agree with Zhang Zizhu that time is the organizing principle for Epithalamion, and the connection between sonnets is much stronger than in the Book of Songs. I would like the candidate to specify what exactly he means by the centrifugal character or centrifugality of Il Canzoniere. Obviously, it has some connection with the first part of chapter 2. The idea is given in the introduction, but it's not repeated anywhere else in the dissertation. In the contents, the poems by Petrarch are united by a recurrent theme to his love to Laura. In the second chapter, the candidate analyzes the story about Cupid who was stung by a bee, and he finds some similarities in his suffering with the suffering of a person in love who has gone to certain tortures before his love is returned. This too allowed Spenser to distance himself away from the world of simple sensual joys, and secondly, to shake off aesthetic tiredness from constant descriptions of the advantages that the love lady has. So, the first, the two parts of the lyrical cycle have some logical connection. In this respect, it's only logical that the third part of the dissertation focuses on the two wedding poems, Epistolamion and Prosolamion. Prosolamion was published in 1596, and it was the last work published while the poet was still alive. The chapter is really interesting. The candidate provides a thorough analysis of the structure of both poems, showing that they have some similar artistic devices, and elaborating on the previous ideas of the composition of the two poems. This allowed the candidate to disagree with the traditional view on Epistolamion. The candidate proves that Spenser regarded Epistolamion as an independent genre of poetry and a new one. The poet refers to the national tradition. Here the candidate provides an in-depth comparative analysis, comparing Prosolamion with A Tale of Two Swans by William Valence. The candidate shows knowledgeability and a really scrupulous approach to his dissertation. There are many new ideas and novel ideas. The candidate shows good command of the Russian language. The work has an impressive list of bibliography. English is the second foreign language for the candidate, and the translation into English is also remarkably perfect. So, the thesis complies with the major requirements set forth in the relevant order, granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University, and the candidate can be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of philology. The specialization is 100103, foreign literature, literature of Europe, America, and Australia. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Polikov. Professor Yakushkina, you're welcome with your report. The dissertation focuses on love lyric of the major poet of the Elizabethan period, Edmund Spenser. It is well studied in the English-speaking world, whereas in Russia we don't find many works focusing on that. Apart from Professor Burova, the academic advisor of the candidate. The candidate sees the general task in the further development of the scholarly concept of Spenser's love lyrics and revealing the artistic system underlying them. So his research revolves around the concept of cycle. He gives a brief overview of the concept of cycle in the introduction, and he proceeds with the analysis of 5 works by Spenser, applying the concept of cycle to each of them. The candidate's logic is very convincing. The 3 first works are independent works. These are hymns, sonnets, and anacreontic poems. Amoretti and anacreontic poems and epithalamion have recurring images, metaphors, and themes, so they can be united into lyrical cycle. They have something in common in their genre and their themes. After all 5 works are regarded as a single cycle. So, thus the candidate studies all the 5 works as a cycle, pointing at similarities between all the texts. All the way along, the candidate shows his knowledgeability and expertise when it comes to European poetical and philosophical traditions. He refers to Sappho, Catullus, Anacreon, Italian Neoplatonists, and others. Love lyrics of Spenser is compared to the previously established traditions, troubadours, poets of the Dolce style novel, and even French and English poets of the 16th century. The dissertation and well structured and well thought out, the candidate shows a really rational approach. He has very effective conclusions to each of the chapters. He provides a good review of relevant literature. In this respect, I'd like to highlight section 1.1 and those sections which focus on the history of different poetic genres. I can't fail to mention an impressive list of bibliography comprising 285 sources. The candidate strives to find some rationale for the motive of cruel fare. So if the poet granted his love lady with an angel-like character, she had to despise the earthly love. For Spenser, not his lyrical eye, this meant inability to satisfy his physical desire. In such a situation, let me quote, because of the unfulfilled hope, the lover would inevitably consider his beloved a cruel fare. The candidate is often straightforward in his interpretations. For example, he says that Petrarch lamented Laura's cruelty during her life and began to sing her angelic essence after her death. That's page 94 of the Russian text. The candidate uses bibliographical method, and this makes him identify the emotions of the lyrical eye and the poet with the emotional experiences of a real person. So he supposes that poet's fiancé read his works as they appeared. So this made the poet produce one new poet as an answer to what she did. So in this respect, both the conclusions and the method are confusing. I'm an expert in Italian literary studies, So I disagree with the straightforward interpretation of the images of love ladies in the poetry by Dante and Petrarch. Beatrice and Laura and their and whether they were real is not supported by any documentary proof. There are only some legends surrounding these two figures. In general, the candidate strives to explain the playfulness of troubadour tradition through a hypercritical disguise of their physical desires is also too straightforward. Now less straightforward is the statement that Dante and Petrarch fell in love with married women who couldn't return their love, because only this way people in love could renounce sensual love and strive for spiritual love. I disagree. First off, married women could fall in love with other men. Just recall some Italian novels. And secondly, poets who were in love could start families and have children out of wedlock. The candidate tries to underline the novelty of amorality. It leads to a certain simplification of Petrarch's book. His time structure is not linear, it's retrospective, unlike the candidate's view. Spenser follows him in his footsteps, and he makes this impression even stronger when he uses such words as leaves, rhymes and lines in the first lines of the quatrain and then in the volta. Secondly, there are not so many chronological labels in Petrarch's work. When it comes to numerological features, Petrarch did have them. In this respect, the candidate can refer to Sorokin's research. Today, the word cycle refers to a group of poems which are connected through similar themes. Here, we should rather use the concept of a lyrical book, which are united through the image of the lyrical eye. The word book, which we come across in Emerity 1, refers to a mapula popular in the Renaissance. Hart's book, it's a book of memories. Rerum Vulgarum Fragmenta is not a subtitle, as the candidate states on page 22 of the Russian copy. Besides, it's just a part of the title, which Petrarch had on the first page of his manuscript. The candidate's statement looks not enough well-grounded. I mean, the statement that Petrarch's works are centrifugal and have a relatively free, and in Spenser's works the lyrical cycle is centripetal and it leads to the happy ending with a wedding. Spenser was Protestant and Petrarch was Catholic, who was afraid of the Judgment Day. So the poet who was trying, the poet's efforts to overcome this contradiction between earthly and ethereal aspect of the marriage depended on the religion of the poet. Orpheus is described as a Kulturträger. The love lady is described as self-opinionated but not assertive. Sorrows of love are interpreted as sexual desire. So we see some modernization in terminology, which is not appropriate. We have the words narrator, referring to the lyrical eye. To conclude, I would like to say that the candidate's work is an independent and a complete study with novelty and relevance. The dissertation complies with the major requirements set forth in Order 6821/1 on granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University. And the candidate can be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of philology. The specialization is 10-0103, Foreign Literature, Literature of Europe, America and Australia. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Yakushkina. Now the floor is given to the candidate. He is welcome to answer the questions and comment upon critical remarks. Members of the Dissertation Board, thank you for your positive and critical remarks. I will consider all the critical remarks in future studies. Let me answer some of the questions. The first question is about the methodology which I applied. The biographical method is the oldest. These days, its use is limited. The founders of the method thought that literary works were reflections of writers' experiences. I based my assumption that the images of people in love have something in common with historical prototypes, which was typical for the works of the followers of Petrarch. The biographical method is not the only method I used. I tried to use a set of methods such as historical literature, historical comparative method, close reading, and others. I only partly used the biographical method. What justifies the use of this method is that in the 16th century England, the ideas of Petrarch were a bit altered due to other philosophical concepts. So, in the general literary discourse, these biographical connotations are really obvious. Here, as an example, we can recall Anne Boleyn and Penelope de Vere. So Spenser very often identifies himself with the lyrical eye with many of his works. Take Amoretti, for example. In Sonnet 74, the poet's mother and his love lady were namesakes with the Queen of England. Then we see the mention of the poet's friend Ludwig. And in Epistolamion, action takes place on Spenser's wedding day. If we don't use the biographical method at all, then we wouldn't be able to explain the identification that Spenser has in his lyrics with the man in love and the lyrical eye. Yet I tried to draw this dividing line between Spenser and the lyrical eye. So I received some criticism of my review of the Neoplatonic treatise in the first chapter. I thought that Spenser could borrow the Neoplatonic teaching about love from a number of sources, not only from the humanists' works. He could also have borrowed some ideas from Florentine Neoplatonics. Thus, I focused on works by Ficina and Pico del Mirandola, which formed the basis for the Neoplatonic ideas in the Renaissance period. I will definitely consider this remark in future. I couldn't manage to establish direct parallels between the dialogues of love and the four hymns. I'm sorry, between the dialogues of Atheros by Bembo and four hymns. I managed, for some reason, I did ignore on purpose to draw parallels between four hymns and the Book of the Courtier. I should have been more articulate about this idea in the introduction, where I focused on the Neoplatonist ideas in the Renaissance when it comes to love. I agree. I should have focused more on the Neoplatonic and pathological specifics of four hymns. Hexameter was used before Spenser, and Spenser used a different structure. The rhyming approach that Spenser takes is different. It meant that Spenser renewed the tradition. I would like to thank you for the advice to focus more on the influence of Dante's new life on Spenser's sonnets. Very often you come across an idea that there is no mention of Dante in Spenser's works. It doesn't mean that he tried to avoid this influence. Many of the poets of that school affected Spenser's works. Following this logic, we interpret Donna Angelicata and the Crew Fair to the school of the Dolce Stil Novo. Love ladies were sources of inspiration for enamored poets. The female images are multi-dimensional. So in my work, I took the biographical method to interpret the female image, to show how some ideas were borrowed from the previous tradition. There were some remarks about the inaccuracies about my interpretation of Petrarch's collection. The question was about the centrifugility. For Petrarch and his followers, there is a contradiction between sensual and spiritual love, whereas Spenser manages to overcome it. Some major poets before Spenser, like Thomas Watson and Philip Sidney, who also were Protestants, did not manage to make peace between earthly and ethereal nature of love, though they were also influenced by Petrarch's ideas. Secondly, Petrarch's works did not focus on love only. Some of them were patriotic and praised the nation, whereas in Spenser, love theme is central. Amoretti and Epistolamian focus on a relatively short period of time. So this idea allowed us to juxtapose Amoretti and Epistolamian and Petrarch's work by the concept of centrifugality and the centripetal movement. I analyzed Petrarch's works by in the book which was translated in 1980, and also analyzed the Chinese translation published in 2001, and also commentaries to them. Due to the certain linguistic incompetence, I perhaps made some inaccuracies in interpretation, and this did not allow me to keep abreast of the recent terminology in this field. I would like to thank members of the Dissertation Board for the idea to use the term love poetry instead of love lyrics. I hope it will allow me to elaborate on the terminology and the genre specifics of Spenser's works. There are many narrative elements in Spenser's works. There are 4 stories in Acrostic poems. In 4 hymns we have a story about the lover ascending the ladder of love. This new term will allow me to study the Queen of Fairies, which is an epic work. I would like to thank once again all the members of the Dissertation Board for their attention and interest, for their recommendations and remarks. Thank you. Thank you. You can take a seat. I'm now addressing the attendees who are not members of the Dissertation Board. Does anyone have any questions? So we are now turning to the next item on our agenda. Is the report of the academic supervisor. Professor Burova is absent for a good reason, but she has submitted a concise written report on the candidate's work Let me read it out. Members of the dissertation board, dear colleagues, the candidate has been analyzing Spenser's work for 5 years. First, as part of his master's program, and then as part of his postgraduate course. He has revealed himself as a hard-working student. He has improved his command of both English and Russian during this time. He has conducted an in-depth analysis of Spenser's works and has drawn some major conclusions. I would like to thank all the members of the dissertation board for their friendly recommendations, for their high opinion of the level of the work the candidate has conducted. I would like to thank the candidate for his hard work and patience. And I would like to thank everyone who has been encouraging us on this way. This was the report of the academic supervisor. Colleagues, attendees, now we are going to discuss the issue of conferring or non-conferring the academic degree to the candidates. I would like to
Let's proceed with our agenda. Please switch on the broadcast. Please make sure that we do not have any technical issues. This is the critical moment for our session. So we're beginning the open voting on the issue of conferring the academic degree. Let me remind you that the decision of the Dissertation Board on conferring the academic degree is positive provided more than 50% of the board members, but not fewer than 3 people, voted in favor. This is according to the relevant order issued by St. Petersburg State University. Now, I ask Professor Altasheva to vote on the issue of conferring or non-conferring the academic degree. I think that the candidate for the degree should be awarded the degree of the candidate of science. Now, Professor Antsiferova, what's your opinion? How do you vote? I think that Zhang Zizhu should be awarded the degree of the candidate of philology. Professor Polikov, what's your opinion? I agree with my colleagues, and I believe that Zhang Zizhu should be awarded the degree of the candidate of science in philology. Professor Yakushkina, what's your opinion on the thesis? I vote in favor. I also vote in favor of conferring the academic degree to Zhang Zizhu. So, dear colleagues and dear guests, out of the 5 members of the Dissertation Board, 5 members have voted in favor of conferring the degree. Nobody has voted against and nobody has abstained from voting. So, we confer the degree of the candidate of science in philology. The specialization is 10-0103, foreign literature, to Zhang Zizhu. Now, I give the floor to the candidate for the degree for his closing speech. First of all, I would like to express my deep appreciation to the board members for reading my research paper. Thank you for helping with my thesis. So I thank all the teachers of the department and all the university employees. Finally, I would like to express my thanks to my research advisor, Professor Irina Burova, who has been helping me during my master's and postgraduate studies. I would like to thank everybody who has made this day possible in my life. Thank you. We are closing the session of the Dissertation Board, and please switch off the broadcast.
До свидания.